So today we've got Amy Cole for you. She is an accessibility manager at Pixel, currently contracting as the accessibility lead for the US web design system. She's presenting to us from Central Arkansas. She's a CPAC and also trusted tester certified. So she knows a lot about how to apply accessibility standards to your work, also within design systems. So I think it's going to be a perfect fit for Design Systems Week. Um, the reason that we approached Amy is that we heard about these really cool tests that they are showing within their design system. So they don't just show this is a component and how you use it, but also what they've tested themselves and what you can test yourself when you use the component. And that's really exciting because it helps to kind of keep the accessibility accessible while it's kind of being used. So yeah, I think that's really cool. We're going to hear all about it from Amy. So whenever you're ready, Amy, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me here today. I will go ahead and get started and share my screen. Yeah. All right. Again, thank you so much for the NL Design System team for inviting me to join you all today. I'll be sharing the US Web Design Systems process for conducting manual accessibility audits for each of our components. I'll also outline how we provide manual testing checks for teams who implement our components in their projects. Let's see if it's coming. All right. So first of all, I want to talk about who uses USWDS and what are their needs. Well, our users are all kinds of folks. We support developers, designers, content strategists, UX people, accessibility specialists, and more from federal agencies, large and small. We also support people, anybody can use USWDS. We also have state and other local governments using our design systems, but primarily our focus is on supporting federal teams. Our users need a wide variety of resources. At the most basic level, they're looking for a problem-solving tool for design. They're trying to do more with their existing resources, and they need to be able to easily adopt and adapt our solutions to meet the needs of their agency, and their mission and their audience. So a big part of what we do and what we want to provide for folks is reassurance that when they're building a site using USWDS, they're using accessible solutions. And when they adopt USWDS solutions, they're also building things that are accessible and usable. So if we do this right, we can not only document our conformance, but empower anyone to test their own implementations of our components. Because ultimately, the most important moment of accessibility is not on our USWDS website, but in the final website or application, in the final context where real people use these components. We can't do that testing ourselves, but we think we can make things easier for the folks that can. So we respect and appreciate any accessibility expertise, and we think that any member of a team can and should have an accessibility-centered mindset and be better able to contribute to ongoing accessibility testing. So the solution we've come up with is something we've called in the past critical checks, manual checks, audits, any kind of terminology to imply that they are something that you shouldn't skip over. They're a simple component-based tests for what that component needs to be accessible and usable. Something kind of like an inspection checklist for a car, for example. So for checklist tests to be practical and usable for the broadest range of folks, they must be in plain language. They must be easy to follow. They must be written in like a question answer prompt. And they must help guide the tester through the process. And they also must be usable by all team members, not just developers. So the pages where we publish our manual accessibility checks are separate from the primary component documentation and code pages. As shown in the screenshot on this slide, this is the accordion accessibility test page. The key elements of each page include things like the results, if it passes or fails, if there are passes with exceptions, conditional or failed success criteria, we'll get to that in a little bit later, and tips on how to check yourself for keyboard zoom magnification and screen reader testing. And then we also walk people through how to test for each prompt. I have a URL on this slide if you want to go to our designsystem.digital.gov. If you go to our components page, and then you can start going through each of the components. We're almost done with it. Again, I'll talk about that later, but like the accordion is a good example. It's one of the first ones we did. So these checks go beyond just automated testing. So we see these checklists as a complement to other resources and tools. There are all kinds of automated accessibility tools available, but while automated tools are an important part of evaluating and monitoring accessibility, we know they're not really a replacement for a manual evaluation. And critical checklists aren't a replacement for the manual accessibility resources we already know and support in the American federal government, like the ICT Baseline and Trusted Tester. So our component-based approach is something new to government accessibility tools, and we hope that our simple, plain language approach can help broaden the pool of contributors to accessibility testing and help accessibility professionals go even deeper. So we created 4 types of manual accessibility critical checks. So to keep things streamlined, we created those 4 checks just to make things a little bit easier. We realized there are more than that, but in order to not overwhelm people, we focused on these 4, which include a keyboard testing checklist, zoom magnification, screen reader testing, and then mobile testing. But for the purposes of this presentation and the interest of time, I'll focus on the first 3 today. So we begin each of our manual accessibility audits by reviewing a component at 200% magnification on a typical screen of about 1280 pixels. This method serves to ensure that the text inside the component does not compromise the visibility of essential interactive elements when viewed at a much larger scale. So many people with limited vision, for example, also use assistive technology, which enables them to zoom in on their screens to better see components on the page. For these reasons and more, we seek to ensure each component complies with WCAG success criteria you see on the screen, resize text 1.4.4, and then reflow 1.4.10. One is at 200% and the other one is at 400%. As an example of how we perform these zoom magnification checks, this slide shows some of the checks for the accordion component, and they're written in plain language. We wrote them, which include checks for no need to scroll horizontally when the screen is magnified. The focus indicator is clear when the screen is magnified, and then content does not get cut off when the screen is magnified. And then each corresponding success criteria is marked as passed. The user can also check the checkbox next to each prompt that's actually on the page. It's an interactive page. So they can engage with the content and use the checklist as an actual literal checklist. So once zoom magnification testing is complete, we recommend performing keyboard testing. So a cornerstone of accessibility compliance, as many of us know, is ensuring that all functionality of a site's content is operable through a keyboard interface. People who use keyboard-only actions include those with no vision, and people who use alternate keyboards or input devices such as keyboard emulators. And then some people have fine motor control issues, tremors, literal no use of their hands, in which case they may use a modified keyboard or hardware that mimics the functionality of a keyboard. And then some people, kind of like me, the more I do this testing, the more I really enjoy just using a keyboard. It's a lot faster and a little bit easier for me in many cases than using a mouse. So on this slide, we're sharing a few of the success criteria we test for, including 2.1.1 keyboard, focus visible 2.4.3, and then no keyboard trap 2.1.2. And we also make sure to include which level, if it's at A, AA, or AAA for each of these checks. So this slide shows some of the accordion keyboard critical checks, which include, does a closed panel expand when you use either the Enter key or the space bar? Can you use the Tab key to enter the content and select links or other interactive items? Is the order of visible highlighting throughout the content logical? So for example, the highlighting doesn't skip a link or a panel heading. And then can you navigate out of an accordion panel without closing it? And we understand that screen reader testing, as our third type of testing, may be more complicated than either zoom magnification or keyboard testing. Screen reader testing can intimidate some people, especially if they're not familiar with the software. There can be a higher learning curve on it, but we still wanted to ensure that people are aware of how to perform this testing, even at a most basic level. So the primary reason is that not everybody has used or even heard of screen readers, and therefore there's bound to be, again, a huge learning curve. So to address the potential lack of knowledge for this aspect of manual testing, we share links from digital.gov on where to find training for downloading, installing, and using screen reader software. I also wanted to mention that when myself and my teammate, who is our other accessibility specialist on the project, when we audit the components for accessibility, we use JAWS. We perform our basic screen reader testing using JAWS because not all people have access to a copy. It can be out of a budget or maybe not allowed by a certain organization. And so but it is yet the most used screen reader by people with visual impairments, at least from our audiences. And we wanted to ensure conformance with software that other teams were often unable to test with. So WCAG criteria for screen readers include 2.2.10 section headings, 2.4.4 link purpose and context, 2.4.6 headings and labels, and 4.1.2 name, role, and value, among many, many others. And I wanted to share here an example of a button screen reader test. So this screenshot, which includes screen reader announces buttons in the same order they appear on the page. Note that we have a conditional status on this check. So while we audited our example button code for compliance, we cannot confirm that a team will automatically comply with 1.3.2. That's because this check means you need to ensure that the buttons follow meaningful sequence, and that can only be determined on an individual page basis. So for all conditional checks, we tell teams to test in their own projects, because the only thing we can test is either a storybook link or a link or component code that's actually on the page. So another prompt is screen reader announces the button role. So when you use a screen reader and navigate from button to button on a page using like the B shortcut key, at least in JAWS, you hear the role button. And then by describing words that are announced in JAWS in this way, we hope to reassure teams that if they test using a screen reader, they hear the same roles announced or can confirm they hear similar audible cues. Just as an example, our developers all use Macs, and so they're also testing using VoiceOver. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but when we do our discussions about each of these, they might say, I don't hear the word button, they might hear a different word. And so sometimes that's the kind of thing that will influence how we actually word some of these tests. So during our audit process, we want to note if a component passes, fails, or passes with exceptions, as shown in this screenshot. In this case, the scrollable table example that USWDS provides may not pass all keyboard functionality. We noted that in a related issue in GitHub, that's where we put all of our documentation, and we put the documentation on this page for transparency. And you're going to get also the latest test and the latest version for each of these tests. Our workflow for this process involves many, many team members. The audit itself is part of the process, and then the checklist creation involves many of us on the team. So we use GitHub, like I said, to track our work for the audit. We call it the audit, the re-audit, and the publication of each of the components checklists. And we meet pretty regularly to discuss status. We try to have a minimum of about 3 checklists go live each month, which should be in time for our monthly call with our community, which our next one is tomorrow. Most of our back and forth discussions take place inside a gigantic Google spreadsheet, which if we have time, I'll share with you. I'll share my screen and you can take a look at it, where we comment mostly on the language of each prompt. And we all have pretty much no fewer than like 4 to 5 people reviewing each prompt, if not more in some cases. There's a lot of discussion that goes on. And the process begins with the accessibility specialist, myself and my teammate, and then it moves into content. Lately, we've been moving more into development next because we really wanted to hash through some of the technical aspects of it before it goes to our content team to make the final wording, just so that our wording has a similar voice across all of the pages of the site. And creating these checklists has really enabled our team to think very, very deeply about use cases for each component and how all users, not just those with disabilities, interact with each element. And we've had a lot of great kind of philosophical discussions about something as small as a focus indicator for a current page in a breadcrumb element. We just had that one yesterday. These discussions allow our team to kind of nerd out about website design, which is kind of a lot of fun if you like that kind of thing. And so it's been a really good process. So our audit and checklist process began about a year ago, maybe a little bit over a year ago, and it's taken a really long time to develop, but we've gotten into a really good workflow with it. This streamlined system, it's really working well for our team. We track everything we do using GitHub. It's all very public, and we have component-specific issues for audit, re-audit, writing, and publishing. So each component has its own little paper trail of where we're going with it. And we do the day-to-day collaboration, again, on the prompts and checks using what has evolved into this Google spreadsheet. It has so many comments in it. I don't know if it's just going to become self-aware at some point. It's pretty huge, but it's been a really great landing place to document this whole process. It's been a very good learning experience and a collaboration experience across all of our team. This slide shows a screenshot of just part of what the critical checks auditing process spreadsheet looks like. We're using this spreadsheet to capture each check item and on all of the USWDS data related to those items. So on this slide, I'm sharing a screenshot of a few of just, for example, the table component. And what we hope is that for now, this spreadsheet is the canonical source of critical checklist data. And each row in this spreadsheet is meant to be a single discrete check. Moving across the columns, you can see, which component it is, what kind of success criterion are we checking for? And in here, we've implemented we also have like a simple lookup that you can do a quick lookup for the criterion. It automatically populates the level and the criterion name. We have the type of check. Is it keyboard, zoom magnification, screen reader, mobile? We've actually increased this a little bit more to include more design, especially if it's color contrast in some other areas. Eventually, we're going to go into voice command and test for voice command accessibility as well. And we used a structured approach to writing these tests. It's like closer to a test structure you might be familiar with called Gherkin. Some of you may not be familiar with it. It's pretty funny. We have a lot of pickle jokes going back and forth in our team. But the structure is essentially when you take an action, then this is what the expected action happens. So for every test, there's an action and an outcome. We both want both the action and the outcome to be something really simple and clear. And to reiterate something that I mentioned earlier, we're focused on experience and outcomes on these tests, not the specifics of how we implemented it. So these tests don't require folks to use like the inspector tool or to know exactly how to look at the code, for example, or know even what ARIA is per se. We don't want it to get too tech heavy. We only want them to know, does it do what a user expects that component to do in this test? We're also capturing, in, like I said, this is a very wide spreadsheet, additional description. So if there's more description of the test or the component, common failures and what to look out for, what to be aware of, any kind of related GitHub issues and issue details, usability recommendations. I think the part that has surprised me the most is the example improvements. Not that the code fails or is in danger of being inaccessible. It's more like we have some ideas based on our tests how we can improve the experience. And that's where we leave it up to the teams to decide how to add that. We can add suggestions, But by no means do we tell people only use it this way. It's like, well, depending on your audience, you could do an improvement to this check. So the context also we add in there, the operating system, which browser we used. Again, I mentioned JAWS if we're using a screen reader, and then where we've checked this test on a desktop or a phone, and then when we perform these tests. So like I said, we started this about a year ago. Some of these tests started in about September, sometimes it's late August last year. And so we're now getting back around to the re-audit because these tests take a lot of time and thought. There's probably a reason not a lot of people do this. It takes a lot of legwork and just a lot of work on the part of a bunch of people. So it's been a great process, but it is time consuming. We want to document when that last test was performed. So to give you an example of where we are now, our accessibility team, we've completed the first audit. We finished that a couple of months ago, and the re-audit process has ended, and we're finalizing the content. So we're now into that part where we communicate with the content team and the development team. Our content and dev teams are working on the plain language review right now of the final few checks, and we're publishing each check to the site. We have 19 of them live, maybe more by now. And we have 4 more going live this month, and we have 16 more scheduled for release before March of 2025. And then again, where do we go from here? So soon we're adding more detailed checks, getting further into mobile testing, because we did the vast majority of our tests on desktop. We did do some on mobile, but we now have different mobile devices that we can now test the voice command. We can also test voice command using Dragon is coming up next, and other voice command software, but then also the mobile testing using VoiceOver and getting into the different gestures, swipe gestures, and making sure that our components work in those environments. And then finally, we're also going to start on our pattern library audit this fall. I'm not sure if we have time. If we have time, I will do a demonstration so we can kind of circle back to this. I want to get to the very end and share with you our contact information for myself and the design team and any of our other federal resources that we have. We do have a public Slack channel if you want to reach out to us. We do have an email address, and if you want to talk to someone else on the team, like one of our developers or anybody else, feel free to reach out via that email. And for now, I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have any questions. And if you'd like for me to demonstrate the actual or go into the actual spreadsheet, like I said, it is a little bit of a beast, but I'm happy to open that up and share that if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to see that. I also see a yes, please, here in the chat. We do have one quick question before that I might be able to answer quickly. Is you mentioned 4 or 5 reviews for prompts and multiple people working on the audit workflow. How many people are working on the US design system? That's from your line.
Let's see. We've added a couple of developers. Gosh, where are we at now? Let me see if I can figure that out, because we have mostly a contracting team, and then we also have 2 full-time federal employees on the team, and then 1 part-time. I don't know if many of you, or probably a lot of you, are familiar with the term of web components. So we're rolling out web components early next year. So that's going to be something else where a lot of our development team is working on. Let's see, we have about 12 of us, it looks like, if I'm looking at the team roster, about 12 of us now. And it's grown quite a bit since when I started. It was much fewer than. We've been growing as time goes, especially to put efforts towards the web component aspect of what we're doing.
Cool, super interesting. Yeah. There was also one question from Rian, which is the checks are all about functionality. Is color contrast excluded? Maybe because it's team dependent?
It is. We do include those, but not all of them do we say conditional. We check ours, like we'll say color contrast is in there. It's a good call out. We do check for color contrast. Some of them actually you get into that, no pun intended, gray area of accessibility. If it's like, maybe is that outline, does that need to be checked or something? But yeah, we do have color contrast in there. But again, everybody uses different CSS and they have different color and branding. So we really encourage people to use color contrast analyzer. Make sure that your Figma files are accessible before you even go to development. So yeah, that's a good call out. And I can share with you kind of the interactivity of how we have in the spreadsheet. I can show you where we have all the checks in there.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it'd be cool to move to the spreadsheet.
Okay. All right. Let me share this screen here. Okay, so you can hopefully, are you able to see the giant spreadsheet open here? Let me zoom in just a little bit. So what we have here is, of course, we have the actual component name. We started with accordion, and then I started actually adding links over here to the actual component page. The success criterion is here in the third column. The status, if it's green, it means it passes. We need to come back and do some more housekeeping in here for any that had like a worn status. And that's, sometimes they'll go into that status, and I'll show you how that happens here. But sometimes, well, it might pass, it might not. It actually could be improved upon, and in which case we put an issue into GitHub. The WCAG level, the criterion name. And here you can see we have keyboard, mobile, screen reader, zoom magnification. We finally just added design. We're like, okay, this is more of a design thing. Assistive technology keyboard, because if you've ever tested using a screen reader, you know that the keyboard interacts a little bit differently. Some of the keyboard commands, they're not always the same. And so we actually put in AT keyboard in there. Content, some of the checks, a lot like color contrast, are, did you write the instructions clearly? Because that is one of the WCAG success criteria of labels and instructions. First of all, do they exist? Second of all, do they make sense? And so for content people, again, it's pulling in all of those team members and not just a developer to check for this. Speech input, we're going to be coming up soon for that. And then just assistive tech in general, say if someone's using some other type of input device or a switch. We're going to get into that testing a little bit more. Again, we've just done this first round of audit. We're going to perform this. It's going to be a lot lighter lift going forward, but we're going to do this pretty regularly as browsers change, as things change. We make sure we go through here. And then this gets into the gherkins, as I've said before. This process right here where we've written these has very much evolved over time. We started with a very simple, like, pretty much just kind of like, if you go here, this is what happens. And then we've tried separating it, and then we've gone back and forth. You could probably go through this entire thing and see how we've ended up writing each of these. And so then we have a whole bunch of notes. And so this is when we get into like a whole bunch of like, hang on, what do you think about this? Like, this is where the back channel chatter happens, because like I'll have time to work on something, or my teammate Alex will have time to work on something, and she's like pinging me and like, I don't know if this passes. Do you think this passes? And then every so often we'll have a component be tricky enough where we all have to get together and discuss. We did that with breadcrumb yesterday, for example. And then we have for the website, making sure we have the final one. Like an overview, we have an additional description, for example. Sometimes we'll have common failures. If we have an issue related in GitHub, some issue details, not all of them have those, but then we actually have, like, if it doesn't pass, this is the table. This is the one I was telling you about where this table's cells were merged and we didn't have keyboard accessibility. Here's where we have the actually related issue in GitHub. It was in Chrome and desktop. JAWS, we also got flagged. We also use Site Improve, and then the dates. So like originally it was audited in August, and then it was audited again in, the table was one of our first ones we published. So it was re-audited and published earlier this year. And so it goes all the way down. We get into button. One of the other ways that we've tried to figure out we're not missing any of these checks is there is sort of like a WCAG. Let me see. I think I can probably pull it up, but there's also like a quick check. There's like an interactive WCAG quick check thing where you can check if it's interactive, it's a tool or whatever, and it'll prompt you to kind of think about other checks you might be missing. And again, on our design system page, we have on the components, for example, accordion. We have that the accordion has passed, and you can come down and say, use the accordion accessibility tests. And this is where you actually see the table. We did 23 tests based on WCAG 2.1 AA, and we are incorporating 2.2 here and there as we go forward. And then we have the instructions here of the zoom magnification, how to test with zoom magnification, and then the actual checks, that you can literally check here on the page. And then if we've missed one, if maybe one of them isn't categorized correctly, we tell people, hey, tell us if there's another test you'd like for us to run. Or you're like, you know what, I don't think that's the correct, I don't think that's the correct success criteria for that. I think it needs to be changed. You can report an error and it will take you over to our GitHub, or you can this is how we ask people to communicate with us, is through GitHub. If it'll, it'll prompt you to start the bug process. Anybody can propose one of these. You don't have to be a federal employee to propose one of these. Or again, if you just like to, I shared that email out earlier, if you'd like to do, let us know if there's anything else that we're missing. And then, at the bottom of the page, we have our versioning and our guidance. And like I said, we don't have one for all of them. For example, I know that like validation isn't done yet, and some of the other ones, but those are coming up. We're finishing them up, and the primary ones will be done by January. And then at that point, we kind of get into the more complicated ones. Some of these audits have helped us determine if we want to depreciate any of our components. Maybe they're too problematic for screen reader users, for example, or it's like maybe this is not proving between usability research testing with people with disabilities and with our audit. We're like, you know what, we probably need to recommend some other interaction instead of this component, for example. And we're pretty transparent about that. Again, we talk about that in our monthly calls. Again, it's coming up tomorrow. We have them recorded and posted to the site and YouTube. But yeah, so this is, you can go through any of our components. And again, we wrote these specifically. One of the reasons I wanted to make these tests is to take a little bit of the burden and the assumption that accessibility is 100% a developer's job. It isn't. It is a distributed role. Everybody needs to know how to do it. And our point was that we knew teams were often shorthanded, especially in any kind of government capacity. So like, you know what? It should not be on your developer to do all of these tests. Anybody can zoom in your screen to 200% and perform some of these tests, or 400%. If you get a little, worried about the screen reader process, that's okay. That's why we try to write these in plain language, to make sure that to guide somebody through the tests so they're not quite as overwhelmed with it, because it can be intimidating, and WCAG can be very daunting because it's not really ironically written in plain language. At least I found it's not to be. So that's why we wrote these, to kind of demystify some of these prompts. And I will stop sharing and see if we have any other questions.
That is fantastic, and I appreciate, as someone with a developer background, like, it's great to make this a responsibility of everyone rather than just the developer.
Yeah.
Even though I'm happy to do all the work, but like, no, it's better if everyone is, and plain language helps so much with that. It's It's been really cool to see. Most of the comments in the chat are about, can you give us this spreadsheet in some form or
I'm going
another?
to find out. I know I need to find out if I can. I know it's in our shared Google Drive, which is like a federally, kind of locked down situation. However, I know we do want to be as transparent as possible. So what I'm going to do is I meet with our team today and then find out, because we do want this to be a paper trail, including our conversations that go back and forth, because like some of them get really detailed. Like, I really don't think this passes. I think it does. Here's where it applies. And so it's kind of a lot of fun in some ways if you like getting into granular things. But what I will do is I'll find out if we can share at least some version of the spreadsheet, or maybe even a blank version of this spreadsheet that is kind of stripped out of all of our comments, and then maybe y'all could use it if you want to for your own components. I know that we don't have certain components that other design systems do, for example, in which case, if you want to know kind of our process for going through and determine, the hardest part really of this whole thing is determining which success criteria apply to which component. And I know that there's probably some that we've overlooked. And then as we've gone through, we've determined that, oh, you know what, we've decided to change this from a keyboard test to a different type of test. We need to go back and do that on these other ones. So we're all often going through and updating the tests as we go, as we learn more. It's a learning process for everybody. So I'll find out again if we can't share the spreadsheet, maybe we can share some clean version of the spreadsheet and get that link out to y'all. I think that would have been a tool I would have liked to have had.
Well, that's fantastic, and I would recommend anyone to browse your design system. Either way, there's a lot of the tests there as well that you can look at. I think we'll be looking at them within our team as well, because we're, as we mentioned in the chat we had earlier, like we're working on including some tests and with the criteria to our components to Antonell design system. So yeah, super cool. I'm afraid this is all we had time for today. Yeah. So I'm sure we could probably talk for another hour for sure. But yeah, I want to thank you very much, Amy, for joining us. For you in the morning, for us in the afternoon, it was fantastic to have you here.